Welcome to Pre-Shift, tidbits of wisdom for everyday service. My name is TJ Griffin, and I'm the corporate wine educator for Winebow. We encourage your questions at any point during the webinar, but please use the Q&A rather than the chat bar. Let me introduce your host. Master Sommelier Ron Edwards is the husband of one wife, the father of 5 girls, and a surfer. He has almost 30 years of hospitality experience, and since 2018, he has been the director of wine education for Winebow. And now, here to discuss today's topic, Prove Yourself Wrong, Master Sommelier Ron Edwards.
Good morning, TJ. Good morning, everyone out there. How is everyone doing?
I'm good. I can't speak for all of us, but
well, if you're good, everybody's good, TJ. That's the way it goes, right?
I like to think so. Yeah.
All right. So today is kind of an exciting topic to me because it's a topic that I wish someone had put more effort into my life, because we have this kind of push in the general American psyche as you're out trying to make your way in the world that you need to be right, you need to stand behind your decisions, you need to be confident, and all of those things are true, but no one's right all the time. And we often stand on a confidence that might not have very good support. So today, let's explore the reality that we all need to make efforts to prove ourselves wrong. We carry assumptions into every scenario and business situation, and those assumptions are sometimes helpful and sometimes not. If we approach our business with the mental outlook that we are not in need of more information, then, if we think we've got it all figured out, we're going to miss opportunities, and we're likely going to fail our clients at some level, if not at a disastrous level. And so that's what we're going to deal with today. And I'm going to throw some ideas to think about at you. And I'm going to start with this. And I think that this book has been really great. And there's a podcast that goes along with it called Work Life. Adam Grant is the author here of Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And it's been really a foundational thought process for me over the last 5 months or so, as I've read a few pages and sort of meditated on them to find out, how does that apply to me? How can I get that information into my everyday practice? And so I recommend that anyone on this webinar or anyone who sees it on YouTube later, go out and grab this book or start listening to Work Life and let those thoughts that he puts out challenge you. Now, he has some legitimacy in his ability to bring you these ideas. He's an organizational psychologist. He's one of the most respected people in his field, and his whole life is revolving around going in to help organizations rethink their reality and make sure that policies they've put into place or actions or attitudes or anything are really based on best practice or based on a model that's going to give them success rather than an assumption. So he just keeps pointing at this bevy of evidence that comes from approaching our professional lives and our personal lives as a scientist. Scientists do the opposite of making absolute assumptions that they're right. They actually make hypotheses, and a hypothesis says, maybe this is reality. Let's test it to find out. And so in the scientist mode, you're going to be asking, what do I know? You're going to be asking, what don't I know? You're going to be asking, what do I think I know that should be challenged? And the answer there is probably everything. And if I try this experimentation, how can I verify that it was successful or not? And last but certainly not least, who's an expert that I can ask about this topic? So TJ, if you wanted to ask an expert about whether your hospitality regimen, how you take care of guests, is really meeting the mark, who's the most likely person to ask?
Someone who's successful at doing it.
That'd be a good start. Absolutely. Who else might you ask? If you want to know if your efforts at hospitality are working inside your business, who are the best people or persons to ask?
Oh, I think you're leading me to a certain. Are you talking about my customers or my staff?
Yeah, absolutely. Your customers are a huge source of fact from their perspective, right? So if you, very good, TJ, and thank you for allowing me to lead the witness where it needed to go.
I'm glad
The
it didn't take too long.
yeah, me too. Uh, the idea of sometimes the expert isn't going to a single source, but rather to the people that you're trying to reach with your business. And the other really powerful thing about thinking again, or at least not accepting that you feel like you have the right answer immediately, or the only right answer, more importantly, is safe to fail experimentation, which is a whole nother management philosophy inside of the idea of managing in complexity. And nothing has been a more fantastic example of managing in complexity than the COVID-19 interruption into our lives, where there is no right answer. There is no predictability. There is absolutely no way to know what's going to happen in 3 months or 2 months or even 3 weeks sometimes. And all your decisions are being made inside of what you think you know, and you know it's probably not dependable. That's managing inside complexity, where there are no right answers. One of the ways to manage complexity is safe to fail experimentation, where you say, okay, I'm going to implement this activity, this policy, this attempt to sell wine in a closed down restaurant market, whatever it is. And I know that even if this fails miserably, it doesn't put my business at risk. If it succeeds, then it gives me information that I can use to either improve that process or even find another process that's similar that will be even more successful. And the last part of this, and TJ and I were talking about this right before we went on air because it's such a big deal, and that is the willingness to move to a different approach instead of, or before you get to the point of doubling down on something that you're too tied to. This principle of sunk cost, where you look at the scenario and you say, well, maybe my restaurant isn't where I want it to be right now, but I've put all this time, all this effort, all of this money, and I so believe in this idea that, I don't know, Peruvian food is going to be awesome in Richmond, and it's not working. Do you double down and just work harder on this and live in this world of sunk costs, in a world where you need to do something different because it's not working? That is a very common thing. TJ and I were chatting about it. You want to bring any of that up now that we're live?
Yeah, we're talking about it. To me, it's such a powerful fallacy that affects it affects all of us at some point or another. I see it in so many different aspects of life, and it's really hard to get away from, because it's certainly what builds casinos. And I don't go to casinos because I fall prey to that very easily. I'm like, well, I gotta win at some point, not necessarily.
Mhm.
But you talked a little bit about being willing to change. So you brought up the hypothetical Peruvian food. How do you balance that out? Because a lot of the inspiring stories throughout history of anybody has been people who never gave up on their dream, and stuck with it until they succeeded. So how does that balance out with what you're talking about, willing to change? Is it just
Yeah.
keeping your dream but changing the approach, or how does that work?
It's a great question. And I think maybe the best concept that I can imagine right now is I was watching, I know I'm a complete geek and nerd. I was watching the History Channel, and it was the barons of the food industry in the United States. TJ, if you haven't watched this, I think you would like these episodes.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And this particular episode brought in people like Marjorie Post, and they were dealing with the cereal barons out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and they branched off and went to the founder of Birdseye. And he was entrepreneurial in spirit, and he was kind of a failure at everything he had tried so far to make a living, and he felt like he needed to get away from it all. So he went way up in northern Canada, and he was in a cabin, and he stayed there for almost a year, but he stayed there over winter. And he had access to a body of water where he could fish, and so he was ice fishing in the wintertime. And it was so cold that he noticed that the fish he was catching and then putting beside him on the ice were freezing so fast that they had, when he would then thaw them to cook them, they tasted as if they hadn't been frozen. In other words, he kind of discovered the principles of flash freezing. And so he started working on this and thought, wow, what if we did this for food, like vegetables, that because we only get to eat green beans when they're in season. We only get to eat broccoli when it's in season. And he was right. His idea was right. He had a danger very soon after he finally got up and running, that he had put so much sunk cost in that there was nowhere to go. And that was, he had gone through and designed a blast freezer, first one ever created. He had it made. He had invested millions of dollars of what in modern money to get his first factory going. He was freezing things like crazy, buying food from local suppliers, freezing it fresh and storing it. But he had no sales. TJ, why do you think he had no sales?
Because people didn't see a need for it yet.
People didn't have freezers yet.
Oh,
He was so far ahead of his time. Most people didn't have a freezer in their house. They might have had an ice box. And if the people at the house didn't have a freezer, how many merchants actually had a freezer section?
right.
Not very many. And on top of that, he had enough food to supply a state or more in storage. But guess what else didn't exist? Freezer cars on trains.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So,
You know,
so he's looking at this going, I have created the future, but the future hasn't caught up with, I haven't caught up with the future yet, or whichever way you want to look at it. Well, Marjorie Post came in, who also had significant interest in railroads, realized what he had was actually the future of food and bought him out. So relieved him of his sunk cost, kept him in charge of the business, created a very generous salary for him to continue doing what he was doing, and created freezer cars for the railroads that she controlled so that she could supply outside markets. And Birdseye, as we all know, is a mega success now. But in that moment, right before Marjorie Post and he met, he had sunk costs to consider. He had millions of dollars in real world product in freezers that he was paying to freeze every day and no market to sell it to. So that was one of those, that's a crossroads right there that you're talking about. It's like, what do I do now? It wasn't that the idea was bad, that he needed to rethink his approach. He got to the point where he had the process down and he knew he could do it, but logistics on the other side, the people outside his business were not ready to roll. So that's a good example of like, okay, I wanted to do, somebody who wanted to do all organic wines 20 years ago, TJ, in a restaurant would have been ahead of the curve so far that they would have been alienating to people. Does that make sense to you?
Right. So to go back to the Peruvian restaurant or to use organic wines 10, 20 years ago, if that's still your dream, you don't necessarily have to give up on it, but maybe you need to start small and build on it.
Or you need to ask, what can I do differently to support this dream?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I need to be less of a purist about my dream. Maybe
Right.
I need a different location. Maybe, I've already put, $300,000 in this building, but I'm going to lose all of it. I need to move. I'm in the wrong place, that sort of thing. All right. So I think it's important that we give ourselves a lie detector test. One of the keys in rethinking your approach, position, or belief system is being honest about what you've been telling yourself. Are you telling yourself lies or truth about this issue? And honestly, I mean, very clearly, I'm making this a very black and white kind of thing when it's full of grays. But if we approach it like a scientist, scientists tend to think of the world in black and white because they feel like they can test ideas until they figure out where the truth lies, instead of being okay with the idea that it's all gray in the middle. And we're very susceptible to convincing ourselves that we're exactly right. I do it all the time. How about you, TJ?
I think I've been known to do that occasionally.
I can tell you that I have stopped, I don't know, over the course of lecturing at the introductory course and the advanced courses and stuff like that for the Court of Master Sommeliers, I remember several distinctive moments in time where I realized I have to stop saying this in public because I just found out I've been wrong for 5 years. So I feel so bad that I've told all these students the wrong thing for 5 years. Maybe it was a nuance, maybe it was a glaringly bad untruth, but it happens. And after you've said it 2 or 3 times, I like there's a principle. I don't know what it's called, but it's like if you say it 3 times to yourself confidently, you probably
Oh,
think you read it somewhere in
absolutely.
its truth, right?
That was the big thing for that for me, and this is, I don't know, put a can of worms here, but I was taught when I was starting out by an expert at the time about minerality in wine, and the chalk soils. You can taste the chalk in the wine because the chalk soils. And I went on to tell something like that to probably hundreds of people over the years, and trainings and staff trainings and wine tastings, etc. And then realized that's not, there's no scientific basis for that. So
Nope, just experiential. Yeah. So I also had that same lie and I just changed it. And I said, when these soils and this wine come together, this is a common note that people around the world say about this wine, but nobody can tell you why. But we do know that chalk is not absorbed into the plant. That's all I can tell you right now. So
the more you learn, the more well, hopefully, the more you learn, the more you're ready to say, I don't know the answer to that one.
exactly. And I'm counting on you to bring up that principle here in a minute. It takes a good dose of humility, though, for TJ and me and you and the audience to admit we made up our own truth about, or brought into a, or we brought ourselves into a convenient untruth. Either way, we have to stop and be humble enough to admit that kind of fault. And then once we do that, then we can go back into scientist mode. So be a scientist. Don't defend your methods. Objectively observe them. In an experiment, we seek to confirm our hypothesis, right? Through an objective analysis, we have a control, we have the item that's the variable, we have a control to analyze the variable, and all that goes into this idea of like, well, is it A or B? Well, it's not A, the control won this time. All right, well, that's not going to support the hypothesis. So we got to do the same thing with our approach to running businesses. And I'm not talking about having no direction, but when we wait on our guests and we select beverages for our wine programs, test your theories, challenge your own beliefs, prove yourself wrong or right. And I'm going to go through here in a second some of these things that are very commonly held untruths or half-truths, and sometimes just downright lies, because they're so situational that you really can't make that be the truth. In just a minute, we'll walk through them, and hopefully that'll generate some Q&A from the audience. So stop assuming you're right just because you were right last year or even last month. And if nothing else has happened in the last 18 months of this pandemic, it's forced us into the idea of we cannot rely on information that we had last year because the world is very different now. And so it's even worse if you're relying on information from 2015 to run your business. That is like, that was like a century ago by comparison to what's going on in the real world today. So here's our cautionary tale of a 3-day trip that ended up on Gilligan's Island, so to speak. So common topics that get us in trouble because they result in commonly held untruths. And okay, so these came up out of my head. You should be able to come up with some of your own. And some of these may fall a little close to home for you. Well, the reason they might is that these have fallen a little close to home for me. A lot of these are things I've told myself along the way, or I've heard people right next to me say in the same market that I'm working where I'm doing something different than they say is possible. And I'm going, well, how can you not see that this is possible? So the first one is this really general thing, right? And I think all of us, including myself, have said something like this: my customers will not buy fill in the blank. And you make a decision and you put whatever fill in the blank is, you don't put it where your customers can see it or even have it available, and it's self-fulfilling prophecy. So my customers will not buy. Well, of course, they only can buy what you offer. So if you don't offer something, that's guaranteeing just proving yourself right. Prove yourself wrong. Here's one that's really sensitive in the world of wholesale. And if anybody out there in the audience works in chain retail, you're probably going to send me hate mail, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that is the IRI data. Okay, so this is like research data that's collected from sales across the world from retail establishments that can generate all of this data on who bought what, when, where, and how much of it. So IRI data shows that the average wine drinkers aren't interested in fill in the blank, Pinot Noir from New Zealand, or you just fill in the blank. So let's talk about that for a second. What is the IRI data analyzing? TJ, what can the IRI data talk about?
Tell us what people are buying at retail.
Correct. And what can they buy at retail?
What is available at retail?
What's available at retail. So this is just this never-ending cycle of we only sell Pinot Grigio as white wine because we only offer Pinot Grigio as white wine because we only sell Pinot Grigio as white wine, et cetera, and on it goes. Whereas just this, it's like this closed system where they just keep proving themselves correct because they're not doing anything differently to find out if they could. Now this is, it's a very different game than individual retail or restaurant or anything else, but it is one of the sources of untruth, while it can also be a source of truth. So there's also truth in the IRI data. It tells you age of consumers. It tells you how often they shop. It tells you how many bottles of wine they put in their cart while they were buying hamburger and pizza. But it still can only tell you what they bought because of what you offered. So if you want to find out whether or not you can actually succeed, I mean, everybody in the audience, go out into one of your chain retail establishments that offers wine, go into the white wine section and try to find something that isn't Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, or Sauvignon Blanc. And it's hard. Why? Well, the IRI data shows that's what people buy. Well, if that's all that's there, of course that's what they're going to buy. So the idea of showing something unique is squeezed out by an untruth or a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. The service in my dining room is better than my competitors. I believed that when I was running dining rooms. Prove it. How do you prove that? Can you prove that? It's a good question. Are you happy just leaving it with that thought and moving on? Oh yeah, my dining room is way better than my competitors. Last I checked, restaurateurs never go to other competitors because all they do is work all the time. You don't even know what the other competitors are doing half the time. So be very careful about saying things like that. Our clients are happy with the customer service they get, or I would hear about it. TJ, do you know any stats on how many people actually complain versus not complain, even though they're unhappy?
No, I know it's not a lot. Even myself, coming from the restaurant industry, I know that if I told the manager, the owner, that I had an experience about blah, 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 it would help them. I still don't, because I don't want to be negative and I don't want to complain. So yep. I just keep it to myself. Unfortunately, it's something I wish I would change, but
it's changed a little bit when people can be sort of anonymous and bash you on Yelp, right?
Yeah, sure.
But those aren't always helpful, but you need to read them and find out what you can glean out of them that is helpful. But once upon a time, the average was like 1 out of 20 unhappy clients will say anything about it to you. And I think that's actually high. I think it's probably more like 1 out of 50 or more, unless they're going to tell you on social media. In my case, I feel like if I am known at all in that marketplace, I can't say anything because, well, that's just that master sommelier being persnickety. Even if I'm trying to help them with something that's glaring, I never say anything because it never has turned out well. I've tried it a few times and it just never works. Nobody ever takes it the way it should be taken. None of my customers ask for that. So why would I offer it? And just fill in the blank as to what that is. Last I checked, people tend to ask for what's available. Most people don't sit down in a hospitality facility and ask for something you don't sell. They look at the menu because they know that's all they can get. So that's just a terrible way to think about what you should be selling. I can't sell, oh, this one's close to home, and this is a personal thing, right? I just can't sell champagne by the glass. So I ask you the question, when did you put 100% of your effort into making it happen? And we're actually going to talk about selling sparkling wine in restaurants is an upcoming topic, TJ. So I'm not going to dig too deep into this, but I have heard so many times, I can't sell champagne, it's too expensive. I can't sell champagne, it goes bad too fast. I can't sell champagne. Well, I can tell you in my career, I sold champagne, legitimate champagne, in every restaurant I ran, and I sold it successfully and almost never lost a bottle because I wanted to. Sometimes it's all about what you want to do. That wine is too expensive for my list, my guests, my clients, etc. You know, TJ, you've probably been into many restaurants along the way where you look at the wine program and there's like nothing over $60. Well, that might be not in New York. We'd have to get a different price range, right? Nothing over $100 in New York because the markup has to support real estate. But in the average world, you notice that everything on the wine list is sort of the reasonable price. And yet, you know that the demographic around them has more money than that. I saw it all the time. And so the question is, did you conduct an extensive survey of your client base to make that decision, or are you making an assumption? One of the things we do as wine and hospitality professionals is we unfortunately place our pocketbook in the place of our guests' pocketbook, or our bank accounts in their bank accounts. And traditionally, hospitality professionals aren't highly paid. I mean, we make a living and we do okay, but we're not making what the CEO makes. We're not making, top dollars. And so we sometimes think what we think is expensive is what other people think is expensive, and it's just not true. I know many people whose Thursday night wine is a $50 retail wine. And weekends are a whole nother story because they can. That $50 doesn't mean the same to them as it might to you. And so you have to be very careful about that. My guests, this one's really important because it's myopic. My guests love my wine list. Look at my sales. DJ, what could actually be the problem there?
Well, yeah, again, you're only judging by what they have to choose from.
They came in, they're going to order wine because they're wine people, and you only have one list. It's not like you're offering them your list versus the restaurant next door. So
Right.
Be very careful about that. How many people have stopped you and said, "Oh, I love your wine list," and it probably won't be the majority, just by nature of people don't stop and say things like that. And then there's these kind of statements that we tell ourselves: all my guests want to try fill in your blank. In this particular case, we're going to the extreme. All my guests want to try unusual wines. And that's such a big category that lets you be like, okay, I'm doing an all organic list, or I'm doing an all orange wine list, or I'm doing an all natural wine list, whatever it is, something unusual, off mainstream. Anytime you use the word all, you're already wrong, because people are too unique to fall into the all category. You really can't say that. None of my guests want to try unusual selections. Well, that's the opposite, but it's just as bad. None and all. You just really can't say that about people who walk into hospitality businesses. And so that's not true. Now, it may be that very few of your guests want to try unusual selections because you're in a very conservative market. It may be that most of your guests want unusual wines because you're in a very adventurous market, but you're really not going to be able to say all or none. And this one really kills me because I see hospitality businesses settle in on the lowest common denominator for things on a regular basis. And it is difficult. Not any Pinot Grigio by the glass is fine, but they can't tell the difference because they can't tell the difference anyway. And you could apply that to Sauvignon Blanc or anything else. Please do yourself a kindness. Don't underestimate the ability of your guests or your retail client to know what quality tastes like. show them quality, they will recognize it again. And that is something I have proved throughout my career. Anything you want to add, TJ, before we make some concluding comments?
I just, you made me think of one of my favorite wrong pronouncements of all time. When I was told that the Pinot Grigio I was pouring by the glass was going up to $9 a bottle. And I said, I'm going to remove it from the list. And Mark, I don't know if I said mark my words, but I said it in my tone. No one will ever buy Santa Margarita Pinot Grigio again.
I guess, yeah, you were wrong. They've definitely spent more than $9 for it now. You got to put your full effort in at rethinking, because genius demands effort. And so you got to put your truth to the test, an honest, full effort test where you truly desire to prove the truth to be a lie or a lie to be the truth, so that you can make better decisions and improve your business practices and in the end, beverage lists, etc. Add multiple options in multiple styles. So for instance, like this idea of my guest won't buy wine in that price category. Well, it may be that last time you tried it, all you offered was, I don't know, the $160 bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet. And what you needed to do was experiment with multiple categories and prices in a range, right? So before you did the experimentation, you only had wines up to $100, and then you added one, but it was 160. Well, that's just a really long gap. So add a little flavor there, 125, 140, 160, 150, something like that, and more than one grape varietal represented, because it may be that your customer base is willing to spend money on a different wine style than you offered. But you won't know until you try. And you don't have, in most states, you don't have to buy a case of something. So if you don't have to buy a case, you can experiment more. If you do have to buy by the case, then I can understand you need to run a different model. Ask your clients if they'd like to see different options. If you're a hands-on operator, you will know by talking to the people in your dining room and polling the audience. You can get a lot of information from them, but you have to ask honest questions and look for honest feedback. Add some uniqueness. All right, so the idea of my clients only want unusual, or my clients only want common. Well, add some uniqueness or commonness into those situations to test it out. You don't have to flip the whole wine program around or the bar program, but you add a little bit of the opposite thought to see how your guests react to it. That's a good way to find out what they really want. And you have to stand behind all of it with full commitment to your staff and to yourself. Go experience your competitors' level of hospitality and take their good ideas. I have stolen many good ideas from my travels while noticing their flaws, and took note of, wow, that is something I want to make sure I don't do. And find friends or community members that you can bring into your business in exchange for their full, honest feedback. And let them know in advance, I want you to hurt my feelings if you have to. Because I want to be better. And most people, once you open the door to give that, they can give you honest feedback, then they will. And those of you on this webcast are already here in this idea. Learn something about your profession every week, because when you add new knowledge, it tears down old tired habits. Prove yourself wrong, or you just might be right. And you can smile broadly about it, but that may not be the norm. So make the effort.
Ron, what do you think of comment cards as a tool to get feedback from customers? Do you find that they're honest? Do you find you get good ideas from them?
I have limited experience personally with comment cards, other than I'm always hesitant to fill them out as a guest. And I don't know. I think that you're more, in today's world, you're probably more likely to get feedback through social media than through a comment card anymore.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a social media version of the comment card, because the social media that I hear about in restaurants is usually that person that's unfairly criticizing the establishment for whatever reason, because they wanted a free meal or blah blah blah. So it's hard to gauge that as an accurate feedback. But
yeah, the axe to grind comes first and the praise comes second. So if you're looking at Yelp reviews, for instance, of a business, and you see 9 out of 12 of them are really positive, then the other 3 are probably just people with an axe to grind, and that, mistakes get made. So,
One more question
mhm.
that I was thinking about throughout the presentation. I don't know if you have an answer to this or if Adam Grant had an answer to this, but is this approach something that anyone can do? Because I don't, I was a liberal arts major, and I think a lot of people in restaurants tend to be more, I don't want to say artistic, but tend to be perhaps less analytical than most scientists. So is this an approach that anyone can learn? Do you have to have the mindset for it? Is it difficult for some people to grasp?
I think that you have to put yourself in the mindset, first of all, right? And you don't have to go out and memorize the scientific method to sort of approach things as a scientist. The general idea is learn to question everything, not to create doubt, but to create opportunity for alternate paths forward in case you're on a path that isn't going to take you where you really wanted to go. And scientists ask questions and then look for answers to those questions. And, the opposite thought process is I have the answer and I'm just going to pursue it. And in the opportunity that you don't have the right answer, you end up having to decide what to do with your sunk costs. So it's really just more about start small, ask a lot of questions of yourself and the people around you, with the caveat that they have the freedom to actually respond, right? So they have the professional safety to respond to you. If you ask your frontline server a question about how things are going and you want some honest feedback, then they have to feel safe to give you the honest feedback and not worry about their job.
Sounds reasonable. Sounds like something all of us could do.
Yeah, it sounds reasonable. The professional safety, psychological safety is definitely hard to pull off in the employer to employee relationship, but it takes work, but it can be done. So, on September 7th.
Yeah, what's next?
We're
going back to the world of grapes.
Yep. Do something sommelier-like. We're going to talk about offering Pinot Blanc and Garnacha. So Pinot Blanc is definitely off the immediately beaten path. Garnacha is not. Let's talk about each grape and its charm and accessibility and go from there.
I like both those grapes. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. Please join us then. Tell a friend. We like having you here. And if you've missed any of our past episodes, you can catch them on our YouTube channel at Winebow YouTube. And until then, until September 7th, stay well, enjoy the rest of your summer, whatever remains of it, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.